Hi guys, Mike here from Comp3 Interactive. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering another subscriber request, which is fall damage. Now I'm going to be using a 2D perspective for this one, but this method will work perfectly fine with 3D because we're going to be using rigid bodies and the velocity. So I've already got a little sample project set up. My character can run to the right because there was no use me adding in an animation for left running because we don't need it here. And we can move to the right, we can jump, we fall, and we can jump off a ledge. Nothing fantastic. And we also have this health bar as well. So I'll give you an overview of everything I've got in this project so far, but first I just want to thank Gigatank 3000 for sponsoring this video. I've got his links down in the description. Go and follow him on Twitter, go check out his website and have a look at what he's doing with his new game. I'm sure you're all gonna love it. And I just want to thank everyone over on Patreon who's supporting me. You guys are fantastic. Okay, so let's take a look at what I've got here. I have a slider, which is just acting as my health bar. I've gone ahead and created some animation states for my little wizard. So I'll just show you those. These are being controlled by two triggers, one for jump, one for grounded. Why can't I move that? There we go. And those are going to be triggered whenever you press the space key and whenever you hit the ground. Next we've got the X velocity for moving to the right, and then the Y velocity determines whether or not we're in a jumping state, going upwards, or a falling state, coming back down. So nothing too complicated. If you're up to the point where you're trying to implement fall damage onto a character, you should already have something that looks like this. So finally, let's just take a quick look at the script. What do I have? I have a reference to the health bar. I've got some public floats for our move speed and jump force. I've got the animator and rigid body reference like you'd always find. I also have two floats for the X and the Y velocity values, and a boolean for whether or not we are mid-jump. I grab the rigid body and the animator in the start component, and then in update I am checking for get axis raw on the horizontal axis and setting X equal to that. Similarly, I'm setting my Y velocity to the rigid body .velocity.y. And then finally I'm using those two velocity X and Y values to set the X and Y velocity inside my animator component. Next up we have fixed update, which is just capturing our user input. So we've got if I press the D key, I'll move right. Next we're checking if we are jumping and our velocity equals 0, then we must have hit the ground. So I set jumping to false, and I also set the trigger grounded inside my animator, which just stops the falling animation. Next, if we press space and we're not already jumping, we'll set jumping to true. That way we can't jump twice and keep going up and up and up. We can only do that the once. I set an upward force multiplied by my jump force to the character, and then I set the animation trigger jump to be true. And then you may have noticed I just have a method down here for taking fall damage, ready to go, and all that does is minus 10 from our health bar's value. So how do we go about implementing fall damage into this script? Well, we don't want to take fall damage all the time, so we couldn't just implement it when we get grounded, because even if we just do a standard jump, we'll take a little bit of damage, and that's not ideal. We don't want that. So what we can do, we can keep a local reference to the maximum value that our rigid body's velocity got to on the Y. That way, if it's greater than a specific number, we can then apply fall damage. So I'll show you what I mean. First thing we need to do, we need to add in a private float, and I'll call that max Y vel, max Y velocity. Next, down in our fixed update, when we're actually grounded, we can interrogate that max Y value. So inside here, we can just say if max Y velocity is less than or equal to -10. Now I've done a little bit of testing on this. I know -10 is that sweet spot for my setup, but because we're working with physics and rigid bodies, that value might be slightly different for you. So you're going to have to just do a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of trial and error to find that nice little value. And also we're checking if we're less than or equal to a negative number, because the way velocity works is 0 is perfectly flat, you're not moving up or down at all. If you're into a positive number, then you've got an upward velocity, so that would be the peak of the jump. Then the complete opposite, as you fall down, your velocity goes into a negative number, and that's the one we're interested in. So now all we have to really do in this if statement is call our take fall damage method. And then the last thing to do is actually calculate this max y value. So we can drop an else if we're just jumping here. So the way that's going to work is we're going to check if we're jumping and if our velocity has actually reached 0, which in this case won't be true. So then we'll just check whether or not we're already jumping. So inside this statement, what we can do, we can check if the current rigid body velocity dot y is less than our max y velocity. So in other words, we've peaked at a higher fall speed. Then we'll just set that max y velocity equal to the rigid body's current velocity. And then we just want to make sure that whenever we start a new jump, we set that max y velocity back to 0. So that should be it. The further we fall, the higher that max y velocity is going to get. So the higher it gets, the longer we've been falling, the more likely we are to take fall damage. So let's check if this is working. So we have our standard movement, terrible movement, but it's movement nonetheless. If we press space, we jump, and we don't take any fall damage for a standard jump. But if I was to jump off the edge, we see, because our velocity is increased past -10, we take fall damage. And like I said, this will work for 3D games as well. In the exact same way, you can just interrogate that maximum value of your Y's velocity and determine whether or not you think the player should have taken fall damage for that fall. So again, this one's been relatively short. If you've got anything that you want me to cover, then drop it in the comments below. As you can see, I am actively listening to you guys. If you want to know something and I know it, I'm going to show you how it's done. It's good for me, it's good for you, it's good for everybody. So I think that about does it for this video. I'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more bite-sized Unity hints and tips.